Welcome, everyone. Good evening on this somewhat wintry night. I am so happy to see you virtually, as it were, and to welcome you to this three-part mini course being instructed by our Norman and Cyril Reitman visiting scholar here at the Bildner Center for the fall of 2025, and that is Professor Daniel Stein Kokin. Tonight's mini course is entitled Points on the Map, the Rhetoric and Representation of the Jewish Presence in the Land and State of Israel, and it will also include other presences. Tonight's sort of introductory lecture to give you a sense of the scope of a project that Daniel Stein Kokin has been working on is called Getting to the Point. And he will elaborate on it, but you should, as we go forward, think about this idea of the point, and in Hebrew, nekudah. I want to just remind you of the ground rules. This format, we ask that all of you be muted. And if you have a question, and I hope you will, please put the questions in the chat. And I will be monitoring the questions in the course of the teaching tonight. And at around 20 and 25 minutes, we will take a break to let the audience ask questions of Daniel Stein Kokin. Closed captions are available, and they're extremely helpful in general. And on your screen, you should click on captions or on the three dots to enable a transcript, a simultaneous transcript, so you can also read what's being said. And last, you should know that this session, as well as the upcoming two sessions, will be recorded and will be on the Bildner Center website, so that if you want to re-listen to it, or if for some reason next week you can't come, you'll be able to get the full course in its three sessions. So it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Daniel Stein Kokin, who really has been such an asset to the Bildner Center this fall in so many ways. He's extraordinarily generous with his time, and he also is a bit of a polymath. He sort of has his finger in a lot of different things, which is just fantastic. He's a scholar. I mean, his primary scholarly work is on medieval and early Renaissance Jewish culture, but he's written on rabbinics, he's written on Jewish-Christian relations, and on Israeli music and film. And he's currently affiliated, besides with the Bildner Center for the Study of Alan O. Joan Bildner Center for the Study of Jewish Life, he's affiliated with the Arizona State University, and he is also the upper school librarian at the Ramaz School. So if you're wondering how he does that, I guess he has ingested Kabbalistic manuscripts, and he can be in two places at one time. You will have to ask him about that. Or three places, because he's also been in New Brunswick. He's the founder and director of Kol HaNekudot, All the Points project, which produces interactive online maps tracing the history of settlement in the land of Israel, past and present. He has held fellowships at the Villa Itati, the Harvard University Center for Italian Renaissance Studies in Florence, the Kette Hamburger Kolleg in Bochum, Germany, and the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies at Brandeis University. So atop all of those very prestigious fellowships, he is also the Reitman Visiting Scholar here at Rutgers, and we've been delighted to have him. I will just say one other thing about Daniel Stein Kokin. He gave a wonderful faculty seminar on labyrinths, which is a motif that people don't associate generally with Jewish culture. And with the Rutgers Initiative for the book and our spring Arresti scholar, Noam Sienna, we're going to be doing a printmaking workshop next week with the Scarlet Letterpress. So as I said, he's a polymath. He's been involved with a lot of different things. We'll miss him, but we're hoping to lure him back in the spring, at least for an exhibition that he's doing on labyrinths. So without any more noise from me, please welcome Daniel Stein Kokin.
Hi, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Nancy, for the kind introduction. And it's really my pleasure to express my gratitude to the Bildner Center, to all my great Rutgers colleagues for just the really, truly wonderful environment that you've provided me in these past few months to conduct my research, It's really been a pleasure to have the opportunity to converse with you, to learn from you, and to share some of my ideas with all of you. And yes, there's so much that I've been privileged to be involved in at Rutgers, and I'm really excited about. And wherever you are, I like to say in context Zoom, thank you for your interest, for your time, and in advance for your questions and responses. And I need to share my screen. And this is a good juncture also just to make sure that I can be heard well. Um, and so I hope I can. Um, Someone say something if I can't. And that you can now see my screen. I hope, let me know if that's not the case, because I'm going to assume, if I don't hear from you, that you can see my screen. And you see here the title of our mini course and the specific title, Getting to the Point, for this evening's session. So just a word about this course. I'm really excited that you're participating in it. And my hope is that you'll come away from this course just more excited than you were before to learn about Israeli culture, and also that you'll come away with greater appreciation of just the vastness and diversity and inherent interest, really, of the Israeli enterprise to settle the land. Obviously, there are tremendous moral questions, and I'll come to them in just a moment, but really the settlement enterprise has been an extraordinary laboratory, and there really is so much that one can learn from it. And it's also, I think, and what I'm going to really try to show tonight is just how fascinating it is to see how the whole question of settlement gets addressed in Israeli culture and how the debates over settlement are reflected in cultural production in Israel. That's really the theme for tonight, and I look forward to hearing your responses, your thoughts on what I have to say. So yes, as you already heard, the inspiration for this entire course is my digital humanities mapping project, All the Points. We'll be talking about that especially next week. Tonight, what I want to do is really just sort of, in a way, provide the background for that project, since the name All the Points is perhaps not particularly obvious. And so I want to just give you a sense of where I'm coming from when I call the project All the Points, because really my thesis for tonight is that the notion of the nekudah or nekudot, point or points, have really played a very important role in Israeli culture and Israeli discussion about the settlement enterprise, and both for good and for bad, perhaps. I mean, there's a place for criticism, as we will see. Okay, so obviously this course, the project, deals with a topic that arouses great sensitivity and controversy. That S word. In many quarters, it's virtually impossible these days to mention it. We have our 4-letter words, and then we have this 10-letter word, and Zionist settlement to boot. And especially in light of the very unclear situation that we find ourselves in at the moment. We're delighted that the war has ended, but it's not really over. We're sort of in this sort of unclear period, it seems to me. And so it's natural that we might approach this kind of a topic with very mixed feelings, mixed emotions. I certainly do. And yet, I remain convinced that there's no better way to understand and grapple with where we are today than by revisiting how we got there. And to repeat what I just said, that however one feels about the Zionist project and Israel as a country, as a society, the fact of the matter is that it has accomplished something with its settlement enterprise that has really been quite remarkable, with over 1,000 new communities founded in the course of the last century and a half. And so again, it's an extraordinary laboratory. It's a diverse array of kinds of communities have been created, producing and reflecting their own culture, architecture, ways of life, communal structures. There's just so much to learn. It's so worthy of study, I think, especially in our present moment. And we live, I think it's fair to say, in an age of the idealization of indigeneity. I'm referring here to the term indigenous, from the Latin within and birth, referring to the notion of peoples, particularly communities or peoples, being native to a particular place. So especially on the left, we have this real celebration of indigeneity reflected in the land acknowledgements that we often find on email signatures and on placards and elsewhere. But this idealization of the indigenous is on the left is mirrored on the right, I would say, with the kind of nativism that we are encountering in American society today, a la our dear vice president and others. So you get one, you get the other. And both, in a sense, focus on a particular historical moment and say, these are the particular residents who we value. These are the ones who belong in this place, whether it's the people who were here before us or our direct ancestors who preceded us and therefore us. Both approaches tend to obfuscate the basic historical fact, whether we like it or not, that people and peoples were, are, and I think it's fair to say ever will be on the move and evolving. Even the so-called indigenous peoples originally came from somewhere else, and those real Americans celebrated by some on the right are also more complicated than one often likes to admit. Mark Twain was, as so often, perhaps not far off when he wrote, "There is not an acre of ground on the globe that is in possession of its rightful owner, or that has not been taken away from owner after owner, cycle after cycle, by force and bloodshed." Apropos of this historical moment that we find ourselves in, it's been fascinating for me to observe how North American Israel advocacy has adjusted to our indigenous moment. In recent years, one hears so much discussion about how Jews are indigenous to Israel or the larger Middle East, and the potential significance of that contrast between the two is often obscured. Never mind that our foundational narrative is actually about moving to a new country. And I just refer you to the beginning of Parshat Lech Lecha, Bereshit 12:1. And if you want an even more strident statement, take a look at Joshua 24 after this class is done. I say all this not to minimize the real moral issues at stake, but merely to state that we need to be honest about the reality of human history and the human situation. And specifically with regard to Israel, we need to also acknowledge, whether we like it or not, that significant segments of the society remain very committed to the ideal of settlement. We need only go back just a few years to the much discussed, much controverted Basic Law, quasi-constitutional amendment for Israel, the nation-state law, clause 7 of which states, as you can see here, the state views the development of Jewish settlement as a national value and will act to encourage and promote its establishment and consolidation. I mean, one of the problems is when societies have their foundational myths, their sort of foundational DNA, we might say, and it's very hard to move beyond that, even if it's, whether or not it's good for the society. If a society tries to leave it behind, it often is not really sure where to go. And I think this is a little bit where Israel is and has been for the last several decades. So again, next week we'll focus on all the points on the project itself, and here you see the logo as a kind of appetizer. But for now, I want to take you again on a bit of a background journey across the history of Zionism in Israel, focused on the term nekuda or nekudot, point or points, the inspiration for the title of the mapping project. Now, I'm a cultural and intellectual historian. Historians like to chart and try to understand change. And one of the ways that I love to do this is by tracing particular cultural tropes. I love to take something that I see as emblematic of a culture or an identity or people, and to just sort of explore what happens with it over time, and to try to learn about the society from observing what happens with it over time. That's what I did in my faculty seminar a few weeks back. Nancy alluded to it with images of labyrinths in Jewish culture, and that's what I'm going to do tonight, or try to do tonight, with points in Zionist and Israeli culture. And I hope that I'll manage to convince you that that the nekuda, upcoming pun intended, is a valuable point of entry into Israeli culture and into the inner Israeli debate about settlement practice and settlement culture. So, just to clarify what exactly we mean by talking about points, the term nekuda has a variety of meanings in Hebrew, but the important one for us is that it refers to points on a map, as we're familiar with also, from in English parlance, but not just points on the map. a nekuda also became a way that you could actually refer to the community itself. So you could talk about, oh, a new community was founded, a new nekuda has been founded. And that, I think, is not a way that we would generally speak in English. And it reflects, to sort of coin maybe a new term, the mappedness of the Zionist project, the sense to which Zionism was, as it set out to develop the land and found communities on the land, was in a way orienting itself towards this map, towards this Jewish map, this Israeli map, Zionist map that it wanted to produce. And so I think, typically we think about maps as trying to reflect in some way an existing reality. Here we're dealing with the map as kind of the guiding post for the guiding light for the reality that was unfolding and being created. When did this tendency begin? When did people start referring to communities as nekudot? Not exactly sure, but I have a few things to say about when it began. So there's some handy tools that we have at our disposal today. I don't know if you've ever used Google Books Ngram. I love this tool. You can, any word in so many languages, just sort of explore the frequency of its use. And you see it right around 1920, nekuda sort of takes off. Not so dramatically, but there's a clear materials held, all kinds of archival materials held at the National Library. You see this tremendous spike, and I'm sorry I couldn't figure out how to narrow my time frame from 1784 to 2025. You'll have to trust me that that really sort of tremendous, upward incline basically begins around 1920 and peaks at around 1966, 1967. All right, but certainly by 1930, we have documentation of the residents of what is today Kibbutz Givat Brenner. You see where it is, in the coastal plain, a bit south of Tel Aviv. Today, actually, the largest kibbutz in Israel, wondering what would be the future name of their nekuda. And around the same time, the venerable kibbutz Afikim, just south of the Kinneret Sea in Israel's north, and just a little bit east of the Jordan River, they, around the same time, were simply referring to themselves as nekuda, or even tochka, point in Russian. That's what they were. They were the nekuda. They were the tochka, before adopting the current name Afikim, inspired by the kibbutz's location between the Jordan and Yarmuk rivers. Afikim in Hebrew means streams. And my sense is, that this really takes off in this period, 20s into the 30s. Even in faraway Munkach, today's Mukasievo, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Nancy. I meant to check with you before we got started. There was a Nekuda Verlag, a Nekuda publishing house that published a great deal of Zionist literature in German and some other fascinating books. But heading back to the Promised Land, really one of my favorite of the classic Israeli songs, Natan Alterman's Shir HaEmek, or Song of the Valley, each stanza concludes with reference to the space between Beit Alpha and a kibbutz, and Nahalal, a moshav. And so even though Natan Alterman doesn't actually in the song use the term nekuda or point, it's very clear to me that he's thinking in terms of points. He's basically describing Zionist space by basically connecting between two dots. And when he and doing so with two of the iconic early forms of settlement. We'll talk more next week about the different kinds of Israeli and also Arab communities. But again, Beit Alpha was a kibbutz, Nahalal was a moshav, two of the classic forms of iconic early Zionist communities. And here you can just sort of see where they are. We're in the north, in the Jezreel Valley, and it's not by accident at all that Natan Alterman wrote this song in the 30s about this region of the country, because the Jezreel Valley, this long, fertile plain in Israel's north, was really the first place where you had an emerging real block of Zionist settlement. It was sort of the first space that you could say that had really sort of taken on a Zionist character. And again, striking for me that he, in trying to define the space in the song, he takes 2 points. About 5 years, 6 years later, Woody Guthrie writes, this land is your land. And he doesn't have points. He has redwood forests. He has Gulf Stream waters. Very different kind of orientation to space. Okay. moving forward in this unfolding discourse of points, a key moment uh, uh, happens in the late 30s in the context of the so-called wall and tower, or sometimes stockade and tower, or Choma Migdal in Hebrew settlements, of which there were about 60. These were sort of like overnight communities that really, in all fairness, were not much more than real points when they got started. You see an example on the right, and you see the tower being pulled up on the left. And these communities were constructed basically in response to the Great Arab Revolt that broke out in 1936 and lasted for 3 years. By this point in time, it was becoming increasingly clear that the British Mandate of Palestine was likely headed for some kind of partition. And so creating Od Nekudot ala Mapa, more points on the map, was a way for the Zionist movement to try to stake out claims to particular regions, to basically say, we have a presence in this part of the country, therefore we should be awarded it when the country is split up. And I think it's fair to say that sort of the real heyday, or the sort of the peak of this, the most famous point, nekudot issue or moment or operation, is that of the Hadasar Nekudot Banegev, Hadasar HaNekudot Banegev, on the night after Yom Kippur, Motzei Yom Kippur, 1946. Overnight, 11 communities were founded across the northern and western Negev, and the goal was to basically stake a claim to the Negev. And just a little over a year later, in the United Nations Partition Plan, the Negev was in fact awarded to the new projected Jewish state, in striking contrast to the Peel Commission and other partition plans from years previous. And we'll talk more about all this next week. Apropos of these 11 points, and we'll talk more about them later on in tonight's presentation, you may have heard, you probably likely heard fairly recently about Kibbutz Nirim, and especially about Kibbutz Be'eri, both of which were directly and massively impacted by October 7th, and both of which go back to this night, to this October or Tishrei night back in 1946. An indication, good indication of the place of this operation in Israeli lore, I would say, is the 1976 song, called, appropriately enough, The 11 Points, which was written for the 30th anniversary of Be'eri. Apologize, I could not find a recording of this song, so we'll just have to talk about it, but that's fine. There will be some music a little bit later on, so please stay tuned. So you see that this song, it refers to the 11 points as 10 points and a point. It's a nice little literary flourish, but there's more to say about that. We'll come to it in just a moment. And then right thereafter, 10 points and a point. Today it tells like a tale. Forgive me for trying to be alliterative. It sounds like a tale. And then the song basically takes us on a list through all of them. And then such savage settlement, that again is me being alliterative. Eze hitnachalut pera'it, what wild settlement. I think the song is basically, first of all, the writer needed a good rhyme. And just to sort of convey the energy, the vitality of the enterprise. Today it tells like a tale, 10 points and a point. Then it continues, I'm just giving you then the final stanza. They struck a stake in the ground and struck it deep. The government gnashed its teeth and shouted, "Against the law!" They clung to this Negev, barren and poor, and thought that there is no landscape more beautiful than this. They transmitted to it strength, spirit, and blood, for they knew that the entire country was with them. All right, so this song, I think, nicely captures really the ethos of this operation and of the Zionism from back then in the sort of foundational period. I mean, really the 30s and 40s especially. That grit, that determination, that love of the land and its beauty, the willingness to go outside of the law when necessary to establish facts on the ground, to advance national interests. Of course, in this case, that teeth-gnashing government is the British government, the government of the Mandate. um, which, just to remind us, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the aftermath of World War I, and in light of the British conquest of Palestine in the context of that war, the new League of Nations basically offered Palestine as a mandatory regime to Great Britain, basically for uh, inviting Great Britain to manage the affairs of the country until such time as it should be ready, basically, to strike out on its own as an independent state. So again, the teeth gnashing government is the mandatory government that, of course, did not necessarily look favorably upon people just going to a particular site and setting up a community, but they succeeded. They clung to the Negev. They did indeed. So I just want to go back for a moment to the formulation that the song opens with: 10 points and a point. So I noted that it's a nice literary flourish. It sort of reminds us of, Elif Leilot Velayla, Thousand Nights and One Night, the way Thousand and One Nights is referred to in Hebrew. Um, but I also would like to suggest that it perhaps also, even if perhaps only subconsciously, reflects recognition of emerging divisions in the Israeli consensus about the settlement enterprise. So I referred before to Nirim and Be'eri among the 11 points. Well, one of the other points was Kfar Darom, which, as you see here, is located or was located in what is today the Gaza Strip. There have actually been 3 incarnations of Kfar Darom, which, as you can see, just means South Village. And modern incarnations, I hasten to add, because the place, this site, Kfar Darom, is mentioned already in the Talmud. But first in the 30s, there was a farm, a Zionist farm that was established there. Then again in 1940, but it was a casualty of the Great Arab Revolt. Then again in 1946, a community was founded there, but that community was abandoned during the War of Independence. It was laid siege to by the Egyptian army. And then again in 1970, after the Six-Day War, 1967, a new community was founded in Kfar Darom that survived this time until 2005, when it was dismantled in the context of Sharon's disengagement or Hitnatkut. So in other words, at the time of the writing of the 11 points song, there, in a sense, was 10 points and 1 point. There were 10 points that were inside Israel proper, and there was this 1 point that was in a somewhat different position inside the Gaza Strip. Again, the song talked about today, it sounds like a tale, it tells like a tale, suggesting that Israeli society was in a very different place 30 years ago at the high point of the Zionist ethos. Now, 30 years later, things were quite different, and yet not all of the society was, one could suggest, so different. Nancy, if you're going to interrupt, you want to interrupt?
No, I just want you to know that I'm here to start to ask questions when
Okay.
there's a
Yeah.
brief pause in your presentation.
Yeah. Let me go just a tiny bit more, and then we'll go
Absolutely.
for it.
Absolutely.
Yes. So, because right around the time of, so again, 1946, 1976 was the 30th anniversary of all these communities. The song was written in honor of Kibbutz Be'eri's 30th birthday. But just a little bit before that anniversary, there had been some very significant events that took place on the West Bank that basically uh, marked the real beginning of in earnest, of the settlement enterprise, of the post-Six-Day War settlement enterprise. So we had really sort of similar events at Sebastia, at an abandoned railway station in the northern West Bank near the city of Nablus, in which there was plenty of law breaking and plenty of government teeth gnashing, this time by the Israeli government. And as noted, this was a real turning point for the settlement enterprise really in the populated areas of the West Bank. As we'll see next week, and as some of you may well know, in the years after 67, there was already, quite immediately, soon thereafter, some initial settlement activity, but mostly not in populated parts of the territory. But this started now really in the mid-70s and gave rise to foundings of, and with this I will stop and we'll come back to it, of really a very important point, the settlement of Ofra, founded in 1975, and you can see in the right it's north of Jerusalem, which became a kind of capital for the West Bank settlement enterprise. And, and then just a few years after that, the founding of a very significant point, namely Point, or Nekuda, the settler newspaper that ran from 1980 to 2010, that we will talk about right after we come back from taking a little break to hear some of your questions and comments. Thank you for being with me thus far.
Thank you, Daniel. So one of the questions that has come up is whether or not the original 11 settlements, although it's a little complicated because you said it's really 10 plus 1. So was Kfar Dom always in that first 11? So you can just put that in your side question. But the person wants to know, were these 11 new settlements deliberately placed, in areas where there was a majority Arab or native population, so to speak, or were they geopolitical? What do you know about the thinking about where those 11 in 1946 were placed? And I guess an addendum to it is, what do we know about who were the social history of those places? Who went there? One of the things that I've known about, for example, Kibbutz Nir Oz, which is in the Gaza envelope. I don't know if it was founded with Be'eri, I don't know, but many of those were Latin American, Jews from Latin American countries. So there's sort of three questions here. The 11 points, was it always 10 plus 1? One of those being Kfar Doron, which is in Gaza. Were they placed deliberately having to do with populations that were in the Negev or for geopolitical concerns? And then lastly, what do we know about the social history of those individuals who went to live in these communities?
Yes. Okay. Great questions. So first of all, on the 10 plus 1 or 11, no, I mean, initially there was, they were 11. There was no, the notion of, there was no Gaza Strip back then. The Gaza Strip is a creation of, and this, we'll get into this next week when we really go look at the project and really trace the history and look at some of the borders. But the Gaza Strip as an entity, as a geographical unit, emerges in the context of the War of Independence, because it was the territory that was controlled by Egypt, as opposed to the territory that was controlled by Israel. And we'll see next week how basically how there were the borders proposed by the UN partition plan, but that how Israel managed to actually conquer areas beyond those borders, or in some case, in one case or so, didn't quite capture all the territory allotted to it. So that's what gave rise to the Gaza Strip. So in 1946, when this Miftzar operation took place, there were the 11. I think, and I really think that in the song, the 10 plus 1 is really, I think, was mainly a literary flourish, just a sort of more colorful way of talking about 11. The song is called the 11 Points. But my suggestion was just that, yes, in the political reality at that time, it did make sense actually to talk about 10 plus 1, because there was this crucial distinction that Kfar Darom, it was back up and running, but it was, in a different political reality, being inside the Gaza Strip. So in terms of the planning, so yeah, I mean, there definitely were Arab villages in that part of the country, yes. But there was also, some open territory, and there was a desire, there was a desire to basically, to ensure sort of viable borders, to ensure space for what was intended to be the emerging Jewish polity. Again, already in the 30s, we start to have partition plans. So there was a sense that the British mandate isn't going to last forever. The land is going to be split up between the two main communities in some form. And so what's the sort of territory? And basically, we'll see next week. So I don't want to get into it too much, but the Peel plan really allotted a very sort of minimal amount of territory to to the Jewish state. And
Can
then,
you, sorry, I'm interrupting, but I'm not sure everyone knows about the Peel Commission.
yes,
It's
sorry,
it's
we'll
such
see
it's
it next
one of
week.
those extraordinary moments. Yeah.
Yes, we'll see it next week. So just
Okay.
stay tuned. Um,
1937, though, right?
yeah, yes. Uh, 10 years before the UN partition plan. Basically, it was the first major British attempt to come up with a way of, splitting up the territory. It was a British commission named after Lord Peel. We'll talk more about it next week. And as for the social history, I want to just make sure we have time for what I want to get to today, so I'll address that next week a bit more, if that's all right.
Okay, wait, on that note, just so you know, and just put in your notes, and we won't address it now because I know you're going to talk about it in subsequent sessions. But someone wanted to ask about the Bedouins,
Yeah,
where do they fit? And I know that you're going to
yeah,
address that.
yeah,
So I just want to be clear to everyone when Daniel posited this project to me or to us, it's very clear he's extremely sensitive to, it's not a binary. These settlement the people who live in this land are not, it's not binary one or the other, even though that's the way our political discourse has discussed it. There are lots of different people there. Obviously, the biggest communities are what we might think of Palestinians or and Jews, but there are lots of other people, and he's going to address that in his mapping.
yeah.
So
And I'll
thank
just say, just quickly, I mean, that's really the reason why I called the project All the Points. I'm talking today about the points, which were really Jewish points. But in entitling the project All the Points, I'm indicating my interest, my commitment to trying to track and represent, and in that sense, really honor all the communities that have been present in the land, Arab, Jewish, and yes, other communities as well, both in the past and still today in the present.
Okay, great.
All right.
Onward.
So yeah, so where we left off in our previous episode, we got to basically Ofra and we got to Nekuda, and which again became sort of the really sort of quasi-official settler newspaper. It was founded only, I think, about 3 months after the creation of the Moetzet Yesha. Yesha was the acronym for Yehuda, Shomron, and Hevel Aza, the three territories that constituted the settlements conquered by Israel in the Six-Day War: Samaria in the north, Judea in the south, and the West Bank, and then Gaza, of course, on the southern coastal strip. And the newspaper was based in Ofra and really became sort of the central organ for members of the settler movement to exchange ideas, to reflect on political developments, to engage in creativity, and so forth. And but you sort of see, first of all, it's striking to me that this was the title that was adopted, and I think in many ways because it necessarily, by using this term nekuda, our point, evoked basically the Zionist past, the heyday of the Zionist movement back in the 30s and 40s, and it, in a sense, appropriated that terminology for the settler movement. And in a sense, the settlers often have argued that they're basically just doing what the earlier Zionists did. And here, this choice of term reflects this desire to sort of project what they are about as, in a sense, a continuation or a sort of restarting or a renaissance of that earlier ethos. Though I would say, sort of naming their publication this way, and even you sort of see it's not just point, but it's point, really sort of really emphasized the point in a stronger manner than before, and it really reflects sort of the seriousness and intensity with which they focused on the settlement enterprise. And I should also note that their success in presenting themselves as, in a sense, doing what the earlier Zionists did also helps explain in many respects the difficulty that the Israeli government has had in responding, since many in the government also, even if they sort of were opposed in one manner or another, had a certain inherent sympathy with what they were doing, because it reminded, say, older politicians, it reminded them of, in many respects, of their younger years. And yet not all segments of society were so point-focused, let's say. And so I'm struck, when I'm in this sort of exploration of this sort of point discourse, as we might call it, pointillism, I don't know. I'm looking out for contrasts between different segments of Israeli society. And so we saw basically in the case of the celebration of Be'eri, this sense of, oh, it seems like a legend, it seems like a tale. We've come to a very different point in our society. And yet we see in Sebastia and Ofra that sort of Zionist grit and law breaking and so forth is still very much alive. And so now in the context of Nekuda in 1980, which of course is, in this context, Menachem Begin is prime minister, and for the first time you have an Israeli government that seems really committed to advancing the settlement enterprise, even though there was activity happening already even prior to the sort of great revolution of 1977, when the Labor Party lost power for the first time. Even before that, there had been some, Ofra, for example, and Sebastian. That all happened under Labor government, and the settlers succeeded actually in managing to found some communities in the heart of the West Bank, in the heart of Yehuda and Shomron. But so back to Nekuda, I'm sort of struck by the appearance just a year later by this really just whimsical and entertaining, lovely book called Al Hamapa by the celebrated Israeli caricaturist Dani Kerman. And Al Mapa, it's a great title because it literally means, on the map or about the map, but it also means on the tablecloth. And you can sort of see in the cover picture how that plays with both of these. And basically the book is just a series of whimsical drawings that sort of play with the familiar shape of the map of Israel in all kinds of ways. Most of them have nothing to do with points, but I am sort of struck by a number of cases in which they do. And I can't help but wonder, I don't want to impose too much here, but I'll be grateful if you'll grant me the sort of suggestion that there's a way in which some of these images echo the stridency and the ideological determination of the Nekuda newspaper, and sort of playfully imagining all kinds of different points in the context of the Israeli map. On the far left, it's stocks, information about stocks. Then to the left, it's like this sort of decorative motif of points forming the borders. Then the second from the right, it's all kinds of the great cities of the world: Tokyo, Prague, Los Angeles, Moscow, New York, superimposed on a map of Israel as nekudot, as points. Or then on the right, a kind of reversal of the whole map with map of Russia in one case, France in another case, basically filling in the spaces that normally in the real world are precisely not mapped because they are ocean. So it's just so much fun. I paged through this book at the New York Public Library recently, and it was just a delight. I want to get it from my library here because I think even decades after its publication, it's still lots of fun. Anyway, so I do want to keep going here, but the main point is I think that we really start to see in the 70s the beginning of real dissension and differing opinion, different engagement with the sort of the notion of the points on the map, and that only continues as we move forward. And I'll just sort of refer back to the song from the 30th anniversary of Be'eri, the 11-point song once more. It closes with this sense of that the heroes of the 11 points, they transmitted to the Negev strength, spirit, and blood, for they knew that the entire country was with them. And in that repetition, the entire country was with them. Ki yadu kol haaretz hi itam. I think there is a kind of wistful longing for a time when there could be an enterprise that the whole country would be behind. Because, yes, by 1976, there was this continued and emerging new settlement activity, but there was by no means agreement about it. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to jump now into the 90s. So we just were speaking about the 30th anniversary of Be'eri and the other 11-point communities. Well, when we come to 1996, we encounter this volume that you can see here was actually titled Eser Nekudot V'Nekuda. So the author, Rona Hevron, she basically takes the lyrics from the song and uses them for the title of her book, which is basically a kind of celebration kind of then and now of these 11 communities. So there are a lot of pictures of what they looked like in their very beginnings, pictures from the operation, and then pictures of the communities as now flourishing Zionist enterprises, Israeli communities in the 1990s. And so, but for me, the most interesting part of the book, and I think for what we're doing tonight, is the opening sort of introduction to the book, where it really sets forth what it's about, and the attitude that it expresses vis-a-vis the events of a half a century prior. And then in just a moment, we'll compare it with something from around the same time that has a very different point of view. So you see it's for the Jubilee of the 11 points in the Negev, 50th anniversary, and then this very sort of heroic language, B'mivtza hiyashvutin no'az, alu 11 nekudot lichbosh et hanegev hashomem, b'motzei Yom Kippur. In a daring settlement operation, the 11 points arose to conquer the desolate Negev on the night after Yom Kippur, October of 1946. And I'm just giving you highlights of this introduction, but then I'm very struck by how it continues. As more time passes, the population of Israel increases, and the vision for the Negev is increasingly realized, it is important to look back and tell its story in the manner of, and you shall tell your child. For the children and those who have joined our ranks in recent years relate to the development of the Negev, sorry, that shouldn't be a capital T, the development of the Negev as a given, as if it had always been there. And so this real recognition of the heroism of the founding of these communities, and then a real desire to pass down this spirit of heroism to later generations, to the children, and to newcomers to Israel. So we're here in 1996, so newcomers to Israel refers first and foremost to those who arrived in the context of Operation Exodus, the Jews, the nearly 1 million Jews who in the late 80s into the 90s came from the republics of the former Soviet Union and made Israel their home. And I think Operation Exodus is nicely evoked here in the actual quotation from the book of Exodus. V'higadeta levincha, which in its, the whole pasuk reads, and you shall explain to your child on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt. So there's sort of fascinating comparison of the heroism of the foundation of the 11 points with really the greatest moment of Israelite Jewish history, the Exodus from Egypt, which of course, according to our tradition, was God's work, the mighty hand and outstretched arm. But here, this was, of course, the Zionist heroes themselves who, with their grit and determination, accomplished this great endeavor. And then, at the close, the book goes on to sort of note that the foundation of the 11 points gave birth to many additional settlements. Because that territory then became part of the state of Israel, it was possible to found lots of other additional communities in that region, like, for example, Sderot, founded in 1951. So thus far, we've talked about kibbutzim, we've talked about moshavim. We'll talk more about these communities and what they represent and how they were structured next week. I beg your patience. I meant to mention that Ofra actually inaugurated a new kind of Israeli community, the Yishuv Kehilati, or community settlement. Again, more on all that next week. Sderot was what is known as a development town, which is a kind of a planned city, a city planned from the top down by the government that was established on the periphery of Israel to sort of establish an Israeli presence on the new borders of the state. And these development towns were typically used to house immigrants, especially immigrants from the Arab world or from Iran, who really flooded en masse into Israel in the early years of the state. And so Sderot, again, you see, founded in 1951, initially housed immigrants from Iran and Kurdistan, later became a majority Moroccan city. And Sderot obviously has been a lot in the news in recent years. It was hundreds, if not thousands, of rockets from Gaza were directed at Sderot. Many fell in the city. Obviously, it was affected. It was infiltrated on October 7th. But probably the most famous product of Sderot is the rock band T-Pex and its leader Kobe Oz, who you see in the center of that picture. And I turned to T-Pex because I want to talk about, I think, a real gem of a song of them. It's actually not one of their best known songs, but I think it's a song that really merits being better known, which is why I like to talk about it. And certainly you'll see in just a moment how appropriate it is for what we're doing here tonight. So the song opens, and I'm going to play in just a few minutes. I'm going to play a little bit of the song for you, but it opens with just sort of declarative speech. It doesn't make a good impression. Oh, and I just want to note, I believe that it's going to be shared on the chat two links or two documents pertaining to this song. Here, I give you just a small portion of the text of the song, but you have access, hopefully we'll get access via chat, to the complete text of the song. So when I play it in just a few minutes, you can look at that, but I'll tell you about it also. But you might enjoy just looking over the text more carefully on your own afterwards. And also the official video that the group put out accompanying the song, in which you see scenes from the early and later development towns. Okay, so the point of this, so let me read. So it doesn't make a good impression, thought the leading figures in the government. There are empty patches on the map, and down there a point, a nekuda, is still missing. Thus the big shots issued an order. Let's build a city here and we'll bring a few people who will fill up the new houses with their lives. It's good, lots of points on the map. And anyway, in the papers they promised a big scoop. So the senior ministers commanded in a drowsy voice and ran off to deal with all kinds of emergency situations. A minor deputy came out all the way to bless the new settlement named Ma'ale Avak. So this is a song about a fictional community in the Israeli South, and 2 weeks hence, I'm actually going to devote a session to talking about fictional Israeli communities that are imagined in music, film, and literature. There are a whole bunch of them, and I think they're a fascinating way of reflecting on the real Israel by thinking about these imagined communities. And the name is just lovely because brilliant, because Ma'ale Avak, Avak is dust in Hebrew, and the Hebrew expression Ma'ale Avak means basically it's gathering. It gathers dust. It's basically something that's been sort of forgotten, that's sort of left behind, that's completely uninteresting. It's collecting dust, we would say in English. But there are also a lot of communities in Israel that have this name Ma'ale. Just east of Jerusalem, in the West Bank, we have Ma'ale Adumim. In northern Israel, there's Ma'ale Gilboa. There's even a Ma'alot. Ma'ale means sort of ascent or exalted. It's a kind of, sort of, you might say sort of pretentious name or sort of positive sounding name for a new community. And usually they are sort of up on hilltops. But it's sort of ironic to put way down at the bottom of the map, Sham Lamata, down there, a point called, ascent, if it's down at the bottom of the map. And this song, the lyrics nicely captured this sort of the mappedness of the enterprise, this sense that, oh, there's an empty point down there. It's embarrassing. We gotta put a community there. Never mind if it's really necessary or if the people who are going to live there really want to be there. And that's really what the song is about. I'm going to play in just a moment, and you'll hear the sort of mournful tune of the song once the melody really gets started and the singing gets started, really sort of bemoaning the kinds of lives that the people and it's clear that the song is talking about the development towns that they had. They were often in very isolated regions on the Israeli periphery, cut off far away from major economic or cultural activity. At the end of the road, they say basically at one of the places in the song, and sort of cut off from really being able to achieve their dreams or advance themselves economically. So it's really, and so it's sort of fascinating for me to think that 1996 we have this celebratory volume that comes out about how celebrating the great accomplishment of the 11 communities and how it led to new foundings in the region. And here in this song, we get a very, very different take on the whole settlement enterprise, a much more critical view of how Zionism and then later Israel has gone about creating new communities. And actually, before I play the song, I was going to do it first, but let's just go at the beginning, the opening slide of this official video that you'll have access to in the chat, and that I really do hope you'll take a moment to look at. This is what it says. You have this image of an Israeli flag. You see a camel down below. Very soon after, the camera slides down, and you get sort of this desert vista with the camel. Mukdash l'chalutzei hanegev, anshe hama'abarot v'ayarot hapituach. Dedicated to the pioneers of the Negev, the people of the Ma'abarot. These are the transit camps in which the arrivees, mostly again from Arab countries, were initially housed, and the development towns, Ayarot Pituach, those are the development towns. So basically, this song is presenting those folks, the people who are in the transit camps and in the development towns. They are the real pioneers of the Negev. They are the real heroes of the Negev, at least alongside of, and perhaps really instead of, those heroes from the book that we just saw, the celebratory Jubilee booklet, who founded these 11 communities. So this really marks the kind of real sort of overturning of traditional Israeli discourse. And this is in the 90s, and it's a context in which there was a period of time in which, first of all, Mizrahi music is really coming alive and becoming more accepted, being heard on the radio in this period of time, much more than ever before. And it's sort of a period in Israeli history where there's also greater openness towards really beginning to criticize, look back critically at earlier periods in the state's history. This was sort of the heyday of the post-Zionist historians, as they were referred to. And I think one can understand the emergence of a song like this precisely in that time period. I'll just also note, it's sort of fascinating, this band, T-Pex, you see there are two transliterations in English of their name, which stayed the same in Hebrew, because T-Pex in Hebrew is whiteout, and there was concern about the use of the term copyright and so forth, and so they switched the name as they would write it in English to T-Pax, like a T-Pack, and that shift happened right around the time of the publication of this composition of this song. My point is that it's fascinating to think of a band called Whiteout basically relating to the Israeli map in this manner. It's almost as if they want to sort of white out some of these communities that they feel were created with not the best intent in mind. And so I think we're ready now to just listen to, we'll listen to a few minutes of Ma'aleh Avak. And sorry, hopefully I can get this to work. There it comes. Just a second, and then we'll hear it from the Yeah, I love how the
זה לא מרשים, חשבו אישים בממשלה. יש חלקים ריקים על המפה, ושם למטה חסרה עוד נקודה. החשובים הורידו אז פקודה. נבנה כאן עיר וגם נביא קצת אנשים שימלאו בחייהם את הבתים החדשים. זה טוב, הרבה ניקוד על המפה, ובעיתון הרי הבטיחו חשיפה. כך ציוו שרים בכירים בכל רדום, ורצו לטפל במצבי חירום. עסקן זוטר עשה את המרחק כדי לברך יישוב חדש כמו מעלה אבק. הסתלקות וזעות של גפרורים, בתי קפה עם שיכורים, ואנשים בבית מתבצרים, וכאן כולם חולמים.
All right, so he has reappeared, which means that I need to wrap up very quickly.
Right. So we have some questions. I just want to make a comment that I think, well, I guess it's question class comment, and then we'll get some others, which is, when you presented and your map is this whole focus on this idea of nikuda, nikudot. I wonder in the more recent past, I think I've heard more the idea of uvdot bashetach, like facts on the ground.
Yeah.
So at some point, maybe we'll discuss like if there's been a shift in sort of the understanding between a nikuda and an uvda. So, a fact, but that's just sort of to put in all of our consciousness. But let me go to the chat questions. Someone noted that perhaps the 10 points and a point is somewhat similar to the formulation in the Yom Kippur ritual of, not one, not two. Do you think that there's any resonance there or not?
I got to think about it.
Okay.
I gotta commit one way or another. The nice thing about a multi-series course is that I have an opportunity to think about things and report back. So if I think there's something to say about it, I will comment. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other question is whether or not you think the attack on Yom Kippur and the Yom Kippur War in 73 was somehow related to these 11 points.
Well, I don't think it was related in terms of that being the reason for the. I mean,
the dating of the attack.
Yeah. I mean, look, one shouldn't overdo. I'm giving them a lot of, because they're known as the 11 points, and there was this volume that was published that really celebrated them. I don't want to one shouldn't overdo it. I don't think that was the reason. Possible that was part of the reason why on the 30th anniversary of Be'eri and these other communities. And look, it would be interesting in subsequent research to sort of actually explore what these communities, and elsewhere in the country, what kind of, if any, celebrations were conducted to mark the 30th anniversary. But it's possible that because it was the night after Yom Kippur that this happened, that and there had been this great trauma connected with Yom Kippur. That I think is quite possible that in the mid-70s there was this desire perhaps to really sort of emphasize this great heroism that had happened on Yom Kippur night, precisely as a way of sort of redeeming Yom Kippur as a celebration, as a day on which one could also note real sort of national accomplishment and not just national tragedy.
Yeah, I think one of the questions, and this is always the question to be, I think, really frank about it, is that it's easy to attribute so-called theological reasons to things when your education is theological, as opposed to really coming to terms with I don't love the word secularization, but the reaction or rejection of theology in the certainly the founding mythologies of the state, which is we, the Jews, are not waiting for God and the Messiah. We're actually going to put points on the map ourselves. You could think about the night Motzei, as you said, Motzei Yom Kippur, theologically or traditionally, that would be the first time you put up, the first nail in your sukkah, right? But, these are not, unless tell me wrong, that some of these settlements are so-called affiliated with Dati Leumi, my guess is that most of them are, Shomer HaTzair or Meyuchad, the secular kibbutzim or moshavim,
Right.
and see their definition of pioneering very much in the rejection of a theology or of a teleology of God-givenness. So I think we have to be careful, always to be careful not to jump to religious understandings that may mean a lot now to people, or retrospectively people project backwards, but to really take seriously the modernity, the secularism, the the breaking of religious conventions on the part of many of these people who are, many I'm sure were young. They were breaking intergenerationally with the expectations of their parents. They were radicals in many ways. A word that now has very bad meanings, but they were. That would be a comment I would have. And the other comment I want to make, which I think is implicit and we all should be thinking about, is that the song, the 1976 song that, I'm sorry, I don't want to say Alterman because he's the poet, but the Menashe, whatever, the last stanza talks about strength, spirit, and blood.
Yes.
And students of nationalism, which is somehow a word that didn't come up today.
Yeah. Well,
Students,
could have. Yes.
what?
Well, could have. Yes.
Yes, that this the word there are many different kinds of nationalism and very different streams within nationalist projects, and one needs to be honest, if you will, about the ways in which there's an evocation, even among very secular, even very left pioneers, however you want to call them, with dipping into this well of a kind of ethnic
Hmm.
blood and soil nationalism, which today some people may decry, they may celebrate. I'm not telling people what to think about it at all. I'm just telling us we should think about it. It's
Yeah.
there.
It's certainly there.
It's embedded in the stanza. Yeah.
Yeah. No. No. No disagreement there. Yeah. Um, are there more?
Um, yeah, we have another question. Did you want to say something else though? I'm sorry, Daniel,
Well, what
about,
I thought is maybe if I could just sort of wrap up, like for half a minute when we're done with the questions. Just
okay. So
uh,
the other question is, uh, so someone is telling me there's an even more bitter song than you could have played besides the Male Avak. By the way, Male Avak, immediately think of Shira Malot, sort of ascent, celebration of the end of the meal. But here you have Ma'ale Avak, dust. It's bespeaks the desert. But someone said there's another song, Ani Zecharia ben Ezra ve'lachmi lachma Anya ve'ani gal b'ma'abara etzel kfish leNetanya. It's even more bitter from the 50s. Anyway, so
oh,
again,
no, great.
I think that again, you're alluding to it. Maybe you'll want to talk about it later, which is the social history. Who's actually going to these places?
Yes.
Who does the Negev become home to? Who lives in the settlement towns? Who lives in the Ma'abarot?
Yep.
We know that there was tragically, complexly government policy to settle these areas with people who didn't necessarily, they didn't want necessarily these communities coming into the heartland to Tel Aviv and Haifa. So, well,
Yeah, I
thank
mean,
you.
actually, I had meant to mention with regard to Ma'aleh Avak that David Ben Gurion has a kind of infamous reference to Jews who arrived from Arab lands as human dust in need of transformation, and
Yeah,
it's possible that the song is bitterly sort of reflecting that very denigrating language.
right, right. Thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
Daniel, you any sort of summation words or a little
Yeah. So
preview of next week, and then
yes.
I'll,
Well,
say.
yeah, just two things very quickly. Again, thank you all for participating and coming. I just was going to briefly mention this novel from 2012 called Nekuda, which revisits the period in the late 30s, the time of the Great Arab Revolt and the Wall and Tower settlements, and really uses a community, an imagined community that he calls Nekuda, as an opportunity for really examining questions about Israeli Zionist history, but also about the Israeli present. And then I just wanted to conclude with this important scholar and architect and critic, Sharon Rothbard, who teaches at the Bezalel School, teaches architecture at the Bezalel School of Art in Jerusalem. Um, and we'll end with this, just that Israel's tendency to refer to newly established communities as settlement points hints at the fact that the point on the map was more important than the settlement itself. And this goes back to the mappedness that I suggested at the outset. And I think he's really saying in academic terms what Tepex is saying, singing and bewailing in Ma'ale Avak. And really, ideology, as much as it's about improving a society and its members, often ends up enlisting that society and its inhabitants for its own ends. And Zionism in Israel succeeded wildly in filling in these points and creating points, or creating facts on the map, if you prefer. But at what cost? And that's the question that Rothbard and TPEX are really posing. But next week we'll introduce the All the Points project, which is an attempt really to reclaim the idea of points by being inclusive and actually by trying to draw our attention to the different kinds of communities, to the diversity of the people who lived in them, and ultimately hoping to, in a way, turn our attention that is often so focused on the big known places like Jerusalem or Haifa or Tel Aviv and so forth, and to focus on some of these other lesser known communities, their struggles and their stories. So thank you again. Thank you for your questions, and I look forward to our next two sessions.
Yeah, so everyone, to remind you, next week, same time, 7 o'clock, December 10th. You should have links if to sign on. If you have any questions, please reach our office. And on that, I want to thank particularly tonight Robin Auerbach, our program coordinator, who's been behind the scenes, Karen Small, the managing director of the Bildner Center, who are helping to make sure the webinar runs without any glitches. And I want to also just tell you that we have another virtual program before Daniel's, a week, not a week from, but Monday night, actually. Again, our sort of year-long collaboration with Rutgers Initiative for the Book, and materiality of Jewish life in books and maps and prints and manuscripts. Our Schwartzman scholar, Dr. Joseph A. Skloot from Hebrew Union College, is giving a webinar on the history of the Jewish book from clay tablet to digital tablet, a history of Jewish books. And that's on Monday, December 8th. And I hope you will join us for that as well. And I look forward to seeing you a week from tonight. And again, any questions you might have that you're thinking about, often the questions come later, write them down, and then maybe you can pose them to Daniel Stein Kokin next week. So thank you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.